Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to be doing a worked example of the Spearman rank correlation coefficient. You'll find this question is from the 2016 past paper, which you'll find on the home page of the website. And you might choose to try writing your answers prior to listening to my feedback on each of these questions. Now, the question I'm going to look at today is question 3, geographic data handling. And the one I'm going to focus on is question B. And we can see that there are 7 marks being given up to our understanding of this particular skill in relation to the Spearman rank. Now, what you might choose to do is now go ahead and answer this question. If you are going to do that, then pause it and try writing out your answers to part 1, 2, and 3, and then listen back. Okay, now let's just get into this question prior to looking at how we would answer it. The first thing you need to do with these exam questions is really sort of understand what the question is thinking about. And this question is part of a wider area. So we would have answered question A so far, where we will have been looking at the population of European cities, and they are presented on a proportional circles map. And we're actually asked in this question to explain the factors that might cause the variation across Europe, and that is obviously a knowledge question, which you would probably want to use your atlas to help answer. And the second question is a very typical question that looks at the effectiveness of the technique that's being used to present the data, which in this case is proportional circles. When we get to part B, we are being asked that a student is wanting to investigate whether the GDP of a country would influence the migration rates. And this idea is that richer countries might have much higher net migration rates, as in more people coming in, than poorer countries. And first of all, we're told to state a null hypothesis for this investigation. Now, before we do that, we probably want to have a little look at the data that we're given for this, which is table 1. And this would be included in the exam. So let's just go and find that table of data. Right, so here's the proportional symbol map that went with the first part of the question. And we can see we would have already answered this question. But here we have the wealth of a selection of countries. In this case, we've got 3, 6, 9, 10 countries. We have their GDP, and we have their net migrants per 1,000 of the people. We can see that 9 of them are gaining people for every 1,000, and only in one case, Bulgaria, losing people. Okay, and we're also given this little bit of information here. We'll come back to that shortly. So what we're really being asked to do is, do richer countries have higher net migration rates? And we've decided that we want to use the Spearman rank to test whether there is a relationship, which we would probably suggest is going to be a positive relationship, as in richer countries have higher net migration rates. Okay, now that we've had a quick little look at the table, let's consider the question again. We need to think of a null hypothesis. So there is a very strict way of writing up null hypothesis, and it always starts with there being no statistically significant relationship between, and in this case, the GDP of a country and its net migration. Now, the key part to that null hypothesis is that there is no, and that's the first part you need to say, statistically significant. That doesn't mean that there isn't a significant relationship, it's just not statistically significant. And then the next word is relationship. You need to be writing relationship. Between, and then you always order it. The GDP is the X variable, the independent variable, so it's the one that's influencing the other one, in this case, migration. So there is no statistically significant relationship between the GDP and the net migration, and in this case, the net migration is the Y variable. And that would get us 1 mark. The next question says, using the GDP and its net migration shown in table 1, the student has applied a Spearman rank correlation test to test the strength relationship. The result of the test can be found in supplementary item D. We must evaluate this result in terms of the null hypothesis. What this really means is we need to consider the result and write it out, as we would do whether it was proven or not. So let's go and have a little look at our result again. Okay, now you will hopefully, if you've watched other videos on Spearman rank, know that your result will always fall between -1 and +1. And the first thing we can say about our result of 0.428 is that it lies between 0 and 1, which suggests a positive relationship. However, it's closer to 0 than +1, which means it looks like, or it suggests, a weak relationship. That's step 1. We have a positive but weak relationship. Next, if we test our result against a table of significance, Well, we're only given the part of the table of significance relevant. We had 10 countries, so 10 pairs of data. And our result of 0.428 is actually smaller than the 95 or the 0.05 significance level. So we have not got higher than the required level. So what we do in this case is actually say that we have to accept our null hypothesis, that there is no statistically significant relationship between GDP and net migration. We would go a little bit further and would say, and this is because our result of 0.428 does not meet this 95% significance level of 0.56. Right, so at this stage, we have now answered two parts of our question. And we should have collected 3 marks, because we've evaluated our result and we've also talked about a null hypothesis. This second question is sometimes worth 3 marks in exams where you are asked to evaluate your result. Normally, it'd be worth 3 marks if your result was actually going to have tested positive and you would be determining whether it was 95 or 99% significant. Of course, in this case, it wasn't. Now, the final question, which can be worth anywhere between 4 and 5 marks, sometimes even 6, is why is this a suitable test? So let's explore the key themes that you would want to answer. Now, the first one is that the Spearman rank test is much easier mathematically to complete than the Pearson product moment correlation coefficient statistical test. Now, the Pearson test, which is another test used for testing statistical relationships, is a much more complex test to conduct mathematically and therefore requires a degree of mathematical confidence, whereas the Spearman rank test is a much simpler test to complete and therefore is more suitable if you don't have strong mathematical skills. Now, what else makes it suitable? Well, let's have a little look at our data set, because this will give us some more clues. We do not need a normally distributed data set. And you'll notice in this case, we've got some very small values and some very large values in our data set. We've got, incidentally, 2 very large values compared to all the others. And these are definite outliers, Luxembourg and Norway. What the Spearman does is, because it ranks, it doesn't matter whether the data set is normally distributed or not. Whereas if we were doing the Pearson test, we would require to have a normally distributed data set. Okay, another reason this is a suitable test is we have at least achieved the minimum requirement of the n. Now, it is possible to do a Spearman test with 5. So if we had only had 5 countries data, we could have conducted the test, but we would have a very insecure result. You're looking to have at least 7 or 8. In this case, it would be countries. And in this case, we've got 10, so we're above that. We are still relatively weak, and it would be possible to write that just because we have 10 and that's bigger than 7 or 8 means that we're happy with the result. This is still a weak test because we only have 10 pairs of data. And indeed, we would be looking for ideally hundreds of pairs of data before feeling very secure about the results of this statistical test. Okay, let's just consider some more possible things we might choose to say. Well, one thing we need to do is complete a scatter graph to look at the distribution of our data set and make sure that we don't have an abnormal data set. And that's a step that we could do. But what the Spearman reveals and what it does, and it's the reason for doing a statistical test, whether it be Spearman or Pearson, is it gives us the ability to actually statistically accept or reject a null hypothesis, and to do that with a level of confidence, statistical confidence. Whereas if we were just relying on a visual examination of a scatter graph, that is a much weaker level of analysis when trying to determine whether 2 variables are indeed related to each other. So another strength of this test is it gives us that degree of security. Okay, now just to finish off with, the Spearman rank test, because of its name, ranks the data. So these values will become ranked, with Luxembourg getting the number 1 rank because it has the highest GDP. Norway getting the number 2 rank. Now, the problem with that is we lose some of the quality of the data when we rank data. We lose the high values and the low values. They become disguised as simple ranks. And that makes it a weaker test in terms of the strength of its result. We would ideally, if we had appropriate data, be looking to use a Pearson test. Now, because the second data set here is net migration and it's a per 1,000, so it's 5 per thousand. So this is ratio data. We cannot use the Pearson test because one of our data sets doesn't meet the requirement. And so we've had to use the Spearman in this case. But we should bear in mind that the validity of our results is less secure than had we used the Pearson test. Because all of those themes, or at least 4 of them in this case, would need to be brought into your answer in order to secure 4 marks in this exam question.